In the name of God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen. Ashley Gilbertson is an Australian photojournalist now living in New York. And he only takes photos in black and white because he says that he doesn't want, and I quote, pretty colours distancing the viewer from the power of the images. And the images that we'll see during this sermon today are images that Ashley has taken as he's gone on his morning runs around a devastated and locked down New York. And what he notices, of course, is the disparity between what poverty has done to those who are suffering from COVID-19 in the city, and how people who are wealthy have dealt with the virus. And he notices that there are people sleeping outside of high-end shops like Armani and people around Michelin-hatted restaurants that are actually serving $50 plates of pasta, while some people only metres away are starving. And in his photography, Gilbertson refuses to step away from the suffering that he sees. And he takes his photos in a way that doesn't allow the viewer to step away from the suffering either. Well, in today's gospel, we hear Jesus unwilling to step back from the suffering. I must go to Jerusalem and suffer at the hands of the chief priests and the scribes. And Peter tries to step back from that suffering, but Jesus won't let him step back from it either. Peter takes Jesus aside and says, "Lord, forbid it that you should have to suffer." But Jesus rebukes Peter, saying, "I must go to Jerusalem. Get behind me, Satan." He even calls Peter Satan, "for you are a stumbling block to me." Now, I find the way Matthew tells this story really fascinating. They say that a week's a long time in politics. Well, a paragraph is a long time in Matthew's Gospel. Only a paragraph or so ago, this is in last week's Gospel, if you heard that and you remember, only a paragraph ago, Jesus is calling Peter the rock. "Peter, you are the rock, the foundation on which I will build my church." And then only a paragraph later, he says, "You are a stumbling block." And actually identifying Peter with Satan. Now, stumbling block is translated out of a Greek word, scandalisio. Which we can hear, if you listen into that word, you'll hear the word scandal. Something that scandalises, something that reduces the reputation of, something that is destructive and divisive rather than building up. And for Matthew, this idea of this stone that can be a foundation that can be built on with other stones perhaps, becomes actually a stumbling block that people trip up on. Now, from a biblical perspective, a stumbling block is both what Satan is and what Satan does. Now, that word can be a stumbling block. So what we've got to do is get rid of all the Hollywood images we've got of the devil and little horns and tails and whatever and all that sort of stuff, and look at a purely biblical perspective of this. And unless we have a biblical framework when we talk about these things, we'll go off onto all weird and strange places. Now, most cultures have some kind of mythology of a trickster or a tempter who trips people up like a stumbling block, or who causes humans to make decisions that are not ethical or moral or lead into a destructive and divisive way of life. And we can see this dynamic playing out here as we look at part of Job's story. I don't know how familiar you are with the story of Job, but it begins with the story of the heavenly council. It's like a heavenly board meeting, and God and the heavenly board are sitting. And Satan is among them. He's on the board. He's part of that heavenly board in Job. So it sets a biblical foundation for how we understand this. And the Lord says to Satan, who is like the prosecuting attorney in a courtroom, if you want to imagine this as a courtroom scene, have you considered my servant Job? And the story goes on to say what an upright person Job is, and he never does anything wrong, and he's wealthy, and he's healthy, and his kids are wealthy and healthy, but then the prosecuting attorney says to the judge, basically in this forensic scene, but that's only because you protect him. If you stop protecting him, he will sin. And all the consequences of that sin will sort of crash in upon him. And so God says to the tempter, to the trickster, well, okay, I'll take the fence down. Just don't kill him, but you can do anything else. And of course the story goes on, his house falls down and all his chooks die, and it's a dreadful situation. And then we just find Job sitting on his dung heap, basically. And all his annoying friends coming along to tempt him. And basically these annoying friends just basically say, well, look, this suffering is too much. They can't cope with the suffering. This suffering is too much. Just curse God and die. Get it all over and done with. But of course, Job never does that. He is always faithful to God. He will not give in to the temptation, into the trick of denying human suffering. Job is always faithful to reality, not only to God, but to reality. The foundation stone becomes a stumbling block, precisely because, unlike Job, Peter will not engage in the painful reality that Jesus is presenting before him. And how often is that the case, that the foundation becomes a stumbling block? On Friday we heard Donald Trump pledge to uphold the Second Amendment, or at least his interpretation of it. The Second Amendment is one of the constitutional foundations of the American society, really. It is the right to bear arms. Now, that foundation stone has so obviously become a devastating stumbling block. That foundation stone that's supposed to talk about freedom and liberty and all of those things which in the late 1700s made perfect sense. It was a reasonable foundation stone to lay. When you've just been through a revolution, the right to form a well-ordered militia seemed like a perfectly sensible thing to do. It has now become a devastating stumbling block that has caused so much death and destruction in the United States. Cheap energy provided by the burning of fossil fuels is the absolute foundation of our modern capitalist economy. Our whole economy is built on the availability of cheap energy. But that has become a stumbling block for a future sustainable planet. The whole foundation upon which our economy is built has become a stumbling block. And even the economy itself now, As important and vital as that is, it creates jobs and puts food on our table. But our concept of economy, its very self, is now excuse me, becoming a stumbling block to containing the virus. Because we've got to open our borders up because it's damaging the economy. And we're hearing it again and again and again as the debate hots up. But that in itself is a stumbling block for containing the virus. Can you see how easily foundations become stumbling blocks? How easy the rock on which the church was built became a stumbling block. And how easy that happens even within the church. Those things that we so much valued in the past and made sense in the past, the beauty of the liturgy, the traditional church music, even now the sharing of the common cup, which we can't do anymore because it has become a stumbling block, because it can spread the virus. How easy foundation stones become stumbling blocks. And how aware we have to be when that happens. And how willing and free we must be to put aside that stumbling block and to find a new and life-giving path. Now, at the heart of all those things I've just mentioned, and of course there are so many more, the list could go on forever. At the heart of all those things there is one thing in common. And the thing that is in common to all those things is that all of those things contribute in some way to our concept of identity. You try and take some guns off some Americans, it'll be, that's who we are, they'll say. That's our identity, that's who we are. You try and change the mechanisms of our economy and they'll say, that's the Australian way, that's who we are. You try and change a bit of church music and you'll get an identity response. That's who we are, that's our identity. You try and take the common cup off an Anglican. People died in the Reformation to restore the cup to the people. They say, no, you can't do that. That's who we are as Anglicans. It's all about identity. It's all about our concept of self. And we will fight to maintain that concept that we have of our identity, of ourselves. But the trouble is with all of those kind of concepts of self is that they are incredibly superficial. They are not really who we are. They are not really who we are as people, as children of God, as brothers and sisters of each other. They are really a false identity. They are really a false self. And we human beings fall into the trick of thinking that all of those things are actually who we are, and they are not. And Jesus tells the disciples, if you really want to be who you are, my brothers and sisters, children of God, then in order to live that out deeply, you must become my followers. You must deny yourselves and take up your cross and follow me. And those who wish to save their lives will lose them, and those who lose their lives for my sake will find them. And the trickster, the tempter, is always there to try and to destroy the concept of who we really are and get us to believe that we are who we are not, to confirm in us that false identity. Remember that story of Jesus in the desert being tempted by the tempter, by the trickster. And the trickster says to Jesus, if you are the Son of God. The temptation is to deny who you really are and act out of something else that you are not. If you are the Son of God, tell those stones that they are bread. Well, stones aren't bread. Speak them into being bread, the tempter says. And Jesus says, no, that's not who I am. This is who I am. I know who I am. This is my real self. The tempter says in that first great temptation, eat of the fruit of the tree in the midst of the garden, and you will be like gods. In other words, the temptation is to be someone else, to take on a false identity, not to be truly yourself. Because you are humans, the fullest expression of humanity. That's my identity. That's who I really am. But the tempter says, try this other identity. It is literally the oldest trick in the book. And we keep falling for it again and again and again. How do we follow him? We follow him by becoming our true selves, the true selves that God has dreamt us into being. And truly engaging in suffering can sometimes be the catalyst, the very catalyst that helps us to see our true selves. And when we do that, when we let go of that false self, that false identity, it will feel like we are dying. It really does. It feels like death. Those who cling to their lives will lose it. But those who find their true life will find it. But it is a journey. He's going to Jerusalem to suffer and to die and on the third day be raised again. It is the journey for us of death and resurrection, the death of the false self and the resurrection to the true self. It is only when we have found our true life that we can truly live. Standing in the streets of a devastated New York, Ashley Gilbertson finds beauty in the midst of suffering. And there is only one way that you can do that. The only way to find beauty in that space is to love. Is to love deeply and fully and sacrificially. The Trappist monk Thomas Merton wrote these words. In Louisville, at the corner of 4th and Walnut, in the centre of the shopping district, I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realisation that I loved all those people and that they were mine and that I was theirs. That we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like walking from a dream of separateness, of spurious self-isolation in a special world, the world of renunciation and supposed holiness. The whole illusion of a separate, holy existence is a dream. The Lord be with you.